Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. As we wait for all the folks to pop into the Zoom room, please feel free to get some energy going in the chat and let us know where you're Zooming in from today. We'd love to hear from you. As we get started, I just want to let everyone know that all attendees are automatically muted, and we just ask that you stay that way until directly invited to unmute. As we go through the presentation today, please know that questions can come through the Zoom chat at any time. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll make sure to do a little curation and capture those through the chat. Thrilled to have all of you here. I know that we have a very broad audience today and want to share that for those of you who might be less familiar with the Women's Philanthropy Institute, I'd like to do a little plug for our symposium, which is actually taking place in Chicago in exactly 1 month. 4 weeks from today, March 28th and 29th. The team will drop the link in the chat, and we encourage you to learn more and register for the WPI Symposium. Our theme is All In, All Rise, and we would love to see you there in Chicago. But let's go back to what we are to talk about what we are here gathered for today. And I want to acknowledge and thank our panelists, Jennifer Ching, Executive Director of the North Star Fund, Isabel Layton, Executive Director for the Donors of Color Network, and Mac Lyman, Board Co-Chair for Resource Generation. And we are excited to launch this new research report, Moving Money and Shifting Power for Social Justice, Voices of Wealthy Next-Gen Donors. This research is a little bit outside the norm for the Women's Philanthropy Institute. Most of our research in recent years examines women as donors or giving to women's and girls' causes. Now, this report is not explicitly about women donors, but it touches on many areas of interest to WPI. Giving by young, wealthy donors, giving by LGBTQ+ donors, giving to racial and social justice, intergenerational wealth and giving dynamics, and giving to address problematic ways in which wealth was earned. And with that, I want to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Dale, who led this study. Dr. Dale is Associate Professor of Nonprofit Leadership at Seattle University. And last year, during her sabbatical, she joined the Women's Philanthropy Institute as our visiting Eileen Lamo-Guerra Fellow and a visiting Associate Professor. This is just the latest collaboration that Elizabeth has undertaken with WPI. Her qualitative approach to questions about identity and philanthropy adds so much depth to the research around women and philanthropy. Elizabeth, thank you for your partnership, and please start us out with a brief overview of this research.
Thanks so much, Jeannie. To understand social justice giving by younger donors, we interviewed members and alumni of the donor network Resource Generation. Resource Generation is a donor membership organization that was founded in the mid-1990s to provide donor education, organizing, and a giving community for young people ages 18 to 35 with class privilege. Their mission is to organize young people with wealth and class privilege in the US to become transformative leaders working towards the equitable distribution of wealth, land, and power. While anyone is welcome to join Resource Generation, and the organization does include members from different socioeconomic classes, they define having wealth as being in the top 10% of net wealth for young people, 18 to 35, whether through personal income, personal net financial assets, or access to family wealth. So last year, from April to September, we conducted 28 interviews with Resource Generation members and alumni. Most participants were white, identified as female, many identified as queer or part of the LGBTQ community, and most had net worth of at least $1 million. This sort of qualitative data is really helpful when we want rich, detailed information about a certain topic. But it's also important to remember that these findings are based on a relatively small group of people and may not apply to everyone, even other wealthy, young, social justice-minded donors. So let's dive in. One major contribution of this study is to get closer to a definition of social justice philanthropy. Social justice philanthropy is often defined as funding that benefits underserved communities and is directed toward long-term systemic change. For our study participants, social justice philanthropy is an attempt to reconcile the gap between the world in which wealthy donors operate today and the values they hold for a more equitable future. It's a framework of understanding wealth, systems, class, and privilege that informs a donor's giving. Defining what social justice philanthropy is can be complicated, but our interviewees had the how in common. These 6 practices were typically enacted with this group's giving. First, they seed power. They were aware of their influence as donors in relationship with nonprofits. They relinquished control in these relationships by doing things like making unrestricted gifts or declining detailed stewardship and grant reports from the nonprofit. Second, they worked to be transparent, often by providing consistent support over multiple years to organizations. And they were open about their resources and their willingness to be approached with asks for support. Third, they looked to empower others. They gave to organizations that centered marginalized individuals or communities as leaders and decision makers, relying on the expertise of people who are doing the on-the-ground work. Fourth, they seek to change systems. They saw making long-term transformative gifts to dismantle systems of oppression as a key element of their social justice philanthropy, as opposed to giving to direct services for those in need. Fifth, they give with their whole selves and saw money as just one aspect of their generosity. For example, they fundraised from their families and peers, served on boards, gave time, and invested their assets in non-traditional ways, like investing in community loan funds that deprioritize making more money. Sixth, and finally, they challenged themselves. This group of donors described an ongoing desire to learn and stretch themselves. This meant anything from learning about the issues they funded to challenging themselves to give bigger, bolder amounts, and sometimes even more quickly. Next, no 2 study participants gave in the same ways or to the same people and organizations. However, what this group did have in common was a willingness to give beyond the traditional 501c3 charitable organizations when it made more sense to do so. This could be giving through a different vehicle or giving directly through an individual. Our participants use different types of funding vehicles, giving opportunities in organizations like the ones on your screen, like political giving, mutual aid, and giving to individuals directly. The donors we interviewed are wealthy and have class privilege, but they still encountered obstacles putting their giving into action. One type of obstacle is really the complexities around wealth, such as donors' access to assets or their understanding of their wealth as their own versus that of another family member. The donors we interviewed often had to work to gain control over their money and find financial professionals that supported their goal to give away their wealth. A second obstacle involved the discomfort that interviewees had with talking about money and navigating family relationships. Many resource generation members wanted to give away a significant portion of their wealth and do so quickly, and that goal could cause friction within families. Once participants learned of their wealth and gained access to it, they often learned that actually giving it away took significant time and effort to do so well. This is one major benefit of a network like resource generation, where the group can provide role models and peers who can suggest organizations to support and challenge one another to give more. Finally, as one participant put it, I think being a philanthropist is a beautiful thing, but it's so problematic. The donors we spoke with believed that they were giving away wealth within a flawed capitalist system and using an imperfect system of philanthropy to do so. This is another place that we really saw the Resource Generation Network provide support in helping one another persist in their social justice goals and work through these barriers. Next, what we call intersectional identities, complex and overlapping identities like a person's gender, race, class, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and religious beliefs, often drive giving to social justice causes for many donors that we interviewed for the study. Nearly all the participants held both privileged identities, such as being white, holding wealth, identifying as cisgender, as well as non-privileged or oppressed identities, being a person of color, identifying as queer or gender nonconforming, or being a woman. Our interviewees described feeling that these dual identities of privileged and oppressed motivated them to use their privilege to undo the systems of inequality from which they had unfairly benefited and to minimize marginalizing experiences for others. In other words, giving with a social justice mindset. Finally, this research also highlights some core tensions inherent in social justice philanthropy. For example, participants fought against the inequality that creates excess wealth while simultaneously benefiting from class privilege. They wanted to cede power in the nonprofit funder relationship, but they also desired connection to nonprofits and wanted to be hands-on. They were willing to engage in rapid response giving and mutual aid while also wanting to focus on systemic causes and not the symptoms. And they believe that social and economic systems are broken, but their giving takes place through those same systems in order to have an impact. I'm looking forward to this panel conversation and to the Q&A. I'll close by saying that this is a starting point for understanding how a specific group of donors is thinking about social justice giving. And in the future, we look forward to expanding this work to understand how these practices develop over time as these donors age, as well as how donors who do not have access to as much wealth or to a network like Resource Generation also can give to social justice. Jeannie, back to you.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for the recap of the report, and Jackie was kind enough to put in the chat a link to the full report along with some infographics that help curate the findings. And so we're really looking forward to having a very dynamic conversation with this amazing panel. And I can't thank all of you enough for joining us this afternoon. So what I want to do is invite all of you to introduce yourself and share what finding or part of this research either surprised you or stood out to you the most, and why. And Jennifer, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Jeannie, and thank you, Elizabeth. Really appreciated your report and the clarity of the things that you brought out. Hi, everyone. It's so good to see you. I really appreciate folks joining from all over. My name is Jen Ching. I'm joining you today from Brooklyn, New York, where we got our first snow after a very long winter drought. Yet another climate change phenomenon I didn't know actually existed. I have been the executive director at a community foundation. We call ourselves a social justice fund called North Star Fund for almost 6 years. I know there are some folks on this call who actually have a longer relationship with North Star Fund going way back, including my co-panelist, Isabel, and I appreciate you all being here. North Star Fund was actually founded over 40 years ago by a group of New Yorkers who were coming into inherited and professional wealth. And they were actually surveying the landscape of sort of how they were coming into their giving. They were all at the time fairly young, and they didn't want to actually replicate the family foundations and the family giving processes that they saw laid out before them. And so this group created North Star Fund with two purposes. One was to create a community that raised and moved money directly into grassroots movements that were working on social justice issues of the time. And the second was to be a community that talked about how to do your giving while ceding power. And so for really since our entire fund's history, we have been a living experiment in a tiny corner of philanthropy about how to organize people across race and class, but particularly individuals with wealth, like how to organize people to give more to social justice movements and to be transformative actors in that process, and to really think about what it means to be a responsible funding partner for social justice spaces. What does it really mean to move dollars responsibly and to be not just an ally, but a core support for social justice work? And actually, there's three quick things that I'll just share that I really loved about this report, and I really look forward to speaking about all of these questions in depth. The first is that I think we live in times where the word social justice is very confusing. It means many different things to many different people. And so I really love the clarity of this report to really land on what social justice actually means, that it is about giving towards work that is about transformative systems change, and that social justice is not a closed space of wokeness, like you're either in or you're out, you either know the jargon or you don't, but it actually is this really incredible invitational space where we ourselves can become transformed in the process. And that really leads me to the second and sort of third thing that I really appreciated about this work and that stood out to me, particularly from my vantage point of being at North Star Fund, which is